Hello and welcome to the Legends of Opera, where we shall be delving into the lives of the incredible singers who have given us the heritage of opera. Joan Sutherland, the legendary soprano who rose from a modest family life outside Sydney to become the queen of Covent Garden, the Met, and La Stupenda at La Scala in Milan.
I think her breath control was phenomenal, and she made a huge impact.
On the stage, she was a queen.
Joan Sutherland was blessed with a mother who had studied opera, and it was with her that she learned to sing as a mezzo-soprano. Joan was a valiant student and entered competitions until she earned the chance to come to London. After gaining a place at the Royal Opera House, Joan worked very hard, and her rehearsal pianist Richard Bonning persuaded her to extend her voice into a true soprano.
She really became, in some ways, the queen of bel canto.
One of the most important and significant opera stars of her generation.
I remember the last time I saw her, she wasn't singing, it was Opera Holland Park. She just got a standing ovation just for being Joan. People adored her.
You know, she gave joy to people.
Joan gained confidence and began studying the bel canto roles of Italian opera, made famous by Maria Callas. It was when Franco Zeffirelli directed her as Lucia di Lammermoor that she stunned Covent Garden audiences. La Stupenda was on her way. Joan Sutherland was born in 1926 in Sydney, Australia. Her father, William, was a tailor with Scottish heritage who was tone-deaf from birth. Joan's mother, Muriel, was a fully trained mezzo-soprano and pianist, but sadly, her shyness held her back from ever taking it up professionally. Joan and her family lived outside Sydney on the coast in Point Piper. She had a large family with 3 half-sisters and a half-brother from her widowed father's marriage, as well as an older sister who had severe epilepsy. Joan's father died unexpectedly when she was 6, leaving them penniless. Muriel's family took them in.
Her Uncle Tom was a baritone, and she heard in the house the music of Dame Nellie Melba, Enrico Caruso. She'd hear her own mother singing, and it was just the whole environment for Joan was just totally musical.
She had this wonderful mother, Muriel, who apparently had the most amazing voice. And Sutherland's husband later said that he thought she could have had a career every bit as good as Joan had. And she had been taught by Matilda Marchesi, who was this famous singing teacher. And so for Joan was part of this great lineage, really.
Growing up on the Australian coast from an early age, Joan listened to her disciplined mother practice singing scales every day. It wasn't long before Joan began to sing alongside her. With Joan demonstrating great potential, her mother began to teach her to sing. Muriel continued teaching Joan until she was 18.
Unlike her mother, Joan was a born performer. She was very tall, much taller than all the other children. She had this beautiful, loud voice, and she even, as a kindergarten-aged child, sang the Bonnie Banks of Loch Lomond for a fairy godmother's radio show. So she stood out very early.
She was built to be an opera singer, absolutely. Yes, big shoulders, very strong chest, flat face, wonderful resonance.
When war broke out, it was very difficult for Joan and her family. Her half-brother was a prisoner of war, which was very, very upsetting and distressing, and the family really didn't have much money at all.
Joan had to leave school, her formal education at the age of 16, to basically go out and earn money.
She thinks possibly this is where I'm going to end up, and I'm sure the idea that she would become a world star of opera, you know, was beyond her wildest dreams at that point.
When Joan was 18 or 19 and had been working as a secretary for a few years,
one day she spotted an advert in the Sydney Morning Herald for a singing competition, which she went in for.
The winner of that contest would have 2 years free vocal tuition with Ada Summers and John Dickens. I mean, that was a big deal.
she entered, 40 other singers entered, and Joan won. And this was the real moment which she started to move into her new life. What was very important about Summers and Dickens was that they noticed that Joan was not a mezzo-soprano, but a soprano. They said this is what she should try to develop. Joan's mother, Muriel, was a bit unsure about this. She felt that developing Joan as a soprano would be too much of a strain on her voice and would actually ruin her voice. But Dickens and Summers were convinced she should be a soprano and go for the big roles.
Joan continued to be tutored by Ida Summer and John Dickens for the following 2 years in Sydney. In 1947, Joan was offered the role of Dido in Dido and Aeneas. Joan then received the shocking news of her older sister's suicide. A heartbroken Joan still found the courage to go on stage that evening.
These were really quite tough years for her because she went into competitions and concerts and didn't really get that much success. So it seemed to be at this point, when she was just in her early 20s, that her career was pretty much stalled.
However, her determination finally paid off. She won the Sun Aria competition in 1949 after competing for the last 4 years.
She was also having dramatic lessons, and she was also working hard on her languages. It hadn't been her strongest point at school, but she was working hard on her languages, so of course she could really express and sing the great Italian, French and German opera roles.
In 1951, conductor Eugene Goossens asked Joan to perform the lead in his one-act opera, Judith. This would be her first official appearance in an opera.
She admits it wasn't a great success, but it was a good launch for her. She got very good reviews, even if the opera didn't.
Joan eventually won the Mobile Quest Singing Prize. She used the money to sail to London with her mother, where she began studying at the Royal College of Music.
She'd got quite a lot of success now in Australia, but she knew that if she wanted to make it in Europe on the great opera stages of the world, she had to actually go to one of the great music colleges.
She says before she leaves, I'm going to brush up on my shorthand, keep that ready, because you never know. And off she goes to her destiny.
From there, she got a position with the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, as what they call a junior company member.
It wasn't the big role, she'd be in the chorus, but still it was a foot in the door. And for that, she was paid the princely sum of £10 a week. So this was great for her. This soprano from Australia, a girl who'd had her ups and downs in terms of success. Now here she was singing on the Royal Opera stage, one of the greatest stages in the world.
Joan Sutherland had arrived in London, allowing Joan to develop her flourishing singing talent at the Royal College of Music. Even though she missed Australia, Joan knew it was the right place to be to have any chance of becoming a professional opera singer.
In 1952, Joan makes her debut as the First Lady in Mozart's The Magic Flute. It's not a big role, but she sings it so well that she really comes to the attention of some very important people, and they start to give her real attention. And so she gets some great roles. She sings in Carmen, she sings in Aida, and she sings a duet in Norma with Maria Callas. This is pretty much a meteoric rise. 1 minute she's a member, next minute she's got these really quite big roles on stage.
Maria Callas, the diva of the house, said to her, "You look after your voice. Take care of it, because we are going to hear great things from you."
Callas was apparently very complimentary about her and told her, to look after her voice because, she was going to be a great star.
She came very early in her career, and I think that someone like Joan Sutherland, for example, was very much a product of Covent Garden, and we can justifiably claim her as our own in that respect. And it took her a while to be the big star that she was.
It's there that she met. Well, she knew Richard Bonning beforehand in Australia, but it was while they were together in London that they became a couple, and he was a massive influence on her career.
She was determined to make it, and I think that the house gave her the opportunity to make it with a lot of support and care over the years. And she really became, in some ways, the queen of bel canto here. And it was a privilege for all the people who worked with her over those years, and she became such a big part of Covent Garden's heritage.
Bonning and Joan quietly married in Kensington Church in 1954. She wore a red velvet dress to the ceremony, very dramatic. They were really having a lot of arguments at this point, and the arguments were over Joan's future. And essentially, he felt she was bel canto. She felt she was more Wagnerian soprano. She felt a bit self-conscious that she didn't want to necessarily take those frail, princessy sort of roles on. And she said later that they fought like cats and dogs over it. He said bel canto, she said Wagner. And this was completely against what her mother advised, who was with her. Her mother felt that Joan should not do these roles. They'd be too much of a strain, and she was not fitted for them.
Let's be in no doubt about it. She's not your typical coloratura, Tweety Pie soprano. This was a huge voice. But freakishly, she could do all the coloratura, all the ornaments. She could trill for days. And that was down to Bonning and the training that he rigorously put her through.
He was a very, very persuasive man, still is, to change her technique and learn to sing these trills and these runs and to sing very, very high and very, very fast.
Joan didn't have perfect pitch, and he would use that to trick her. So when he was doing scales or when they were learning particular roles, he would give her the starting note, but then he would just move it up a bit so that she would hit a top C, top D flat, top E. Otherwise, she wouldn't necessarily have had the belief that she could do it.
And suddenly it was like an athlete. She could run, as it were, a 4-minute mile, and she was just stunning.
In 1956, Joan gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, Adam Bonning.
In 1957, she sings Desdemona in Otello, and the Financial Times praises her and says that she does not sacrifice purity to power.
Shortly after that, she made a recital disc for Decca. And from that point on, she was a Decca exclusive recording artist. And she remained so throughout her career.
Bonning is working with Joan to transform her voice from mezzo-soprano to coloratura to the soprano. And the opera community actually sit up and take notice of this and begin to think, oh, she could be a big leading lady. And so she's given acting lessons with the great acting coach Norman Ayrton, but it doesn't really succeed. They don't have a great working relationship. She gets on much better with people like Zeffirelli.
Maestro Zeffirelli cast her in Lucia di Lammermoor, and this opera had not been seen at the house for 30 years.
It got a lot of attention, and the critics loved it.
Even today, people remember this performance, her doing this. It was legendary.
It was quite something. Her breath control was phenomenal. And she made a huge impact in that role.
Maria Callas and Elizabeth Schwarzkopf came to the dress rehearsal and expressed, their amazement at her technique, and it did put her onto another level.
Despite the success of Lucia di Lammermoor, Joan continued to suffer with a sinus condition. She decided to go through with surgery, as this had been affecting her voice. Thankfully, the operation was a success. Joan started getting invitations to appear all around the world, including Dallas in America. By now, Joan Sutherland was particularly celebrated for performing in a variety of roles, significantly reviving notable bel canto operas that hadn't been seen on stage for some time. In 1960, Joan performed at the Glyndebourne Festival Opera in Bellini's I Puritani. In the same year, Joan sang in another Bellini opera, this time at the Royal Opera House in La Sonnambula. It was the first time it had been performed on stage in over 50 years.
She's not just singing, but she's also reviving, and these operas that no one thought the audience could ever want to see, but they do want to see them, chiefly because Joan's in the title role.
One thing everybody always said about Joan was that she was down to earth. Fame did not turn her head, and she was rather a shy person, and I always felt when I met her that she couldn't quite believe in her own fame and her own achievements, that she felt that they were almost, it was as though that they had happened to someone else.
The year after Lucia, she sang in Handel's Alcina at La Fenice in Venice.
The Italian press went wild for her, called her La Stupenda, the stupendous one, and this was all good, clean fun.
Last night, only a privileged few heard your voice. Might I persuade you to let us hear it now?
The thing I find most exciting about her voice is it seems to get bigger as it gets higher. Most sopranos, their voices turn pipsqueak as they get above the stave. With Joan, it just sort of blossoms, and the higher she gets, the louder she gets, the more the voice glows and shines, and that was what was so exciting.
What Joan Sutherland had was a facility in the upper range of the register and an extraordinary degree of dexterity, which made it sound easy. And there was this rock-solid technique underpinning all of the work that she did, and I think that's what made her special.
In 1961, Joan Sutherland was performing all around the world. She was made Australian of the Year and also the Commander of the Order of the British Empire.
Joan was set to debut on the Metropolitan Opera stage as Lucia di Lammermoor. Then there was great tragedy. Just before it was about to start, she received the news that her mother had died. But she also was told that people had been lining up since 7:30 a.m. that morning to get in.
She was such a pro, and it's said that the number of times she cancelled in her career could be counted on the fingers of one hand. She thought, no, I'm going to go on and I'm going to do it tonight, and I will do it in memory of Mum, which is what her mother would probably have wanted, yeah, but it was jolly brave.
She was given a 12-minute ovation for singing the Mad Scene and would go on to sing at the Metropolitan Opera a phenomenal 223 times throughout her career. The following year, in 1962, Joan became the first Australian to win a Grammy for her album The Art of the Prima Donna. In 1965, she embarked on a 4-city tour in Australia with her husband, Richard.
They decided to take with them a certain young tenor, not only because he was beautiful and wonderful singer, but he also fit her on stage. He was tall. She was tall and she needed a tall tenor, and this tenor was Luciano Pavarotti.
Pavarotti, it was a real breakthrough for him, but also Joan was a great mentor to him.
Basically, she placed his hands around her waist, around her diaphragm, and sang, and he learnt a lot about breath control and where you pull the breath from, and yeah, he learnt a huge amount from her.
She's like his big sister, I think. It's the great homecoming for Sutherland. She's the conquering heroine.
In the early years of her career, she'd encountered some problems with various conductors. As a result, she decided to have her husband Richard conduct her next performance.
Joan insisted that she perform with her husband as conductor.
She would say, if I'm coming, he's coming, and it was usually part of the contract.
Her career was their career, and he was her soulmate.
She did occasionally work with other directors. She worked with Sir George Solti on a performance of Verdi's Requiem. She worked with Zubin Mehta on a performance of Turandot, and Pavarotti actually accompanied her in both of those performances. So she did make exceptions to her rule, but generally, if she was singing, then her husband was conducting. When Joan performed in Puccini's Turandot alongside Montserrat Caballé, she actually, to avoid dramatic clash, she stepped to the side and let Montserrat Caballé take the centre stage position, which is very modest of her.
In 1970, Joan appeared once more at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, alongside the great mezzo-soprano Marilyn Horne in Norma. This began a great on-stage collaboration for many years to follow, and a lifelong friendship between them.
She was always having to play these tragic heroines who were always dying, and she had a lot of lessons early in her career, including some rather unlikely ones with Margot Fonteyn, who helped to teach her how to fall gracefully on the stage, because she was getting on for 6 foot and she was strapping, and always felt very, very self-conscious about this. So she was always delighted to do comic roles where she wouldn't have to act all dignified and grande dame.
Throughout the 1970s, Joan became a regular performer with Opera Australia and was incredibly celebrated around the world. In recognition of her work, she was elevated to Dame Commander of the British Empire. In the 1980s, Joan continued to perform in a variety of leading roles, including a return to the stage at her beloved Royal Opera House, taking on one of the most demanding roles for soprano, Donizetti's Lucrezia Borgia. After more than 35 years on stage performing all around the world, Dame Joan Sutherland partnered with Marilyn Horne in a royal gala concert. After 4 decades on stage together, Joan Sutherland and Luciano Pavarotti continued their remarkable relationship at the Metropolitan Opera, celebrating some of their greatest roles through the decades.
Scorda l'affanno, donna dorata, me perdoni al genitore. Che ti perdoni, penso Dio, ma sono punta al mio. Un uomo debole, angel mio, mai più dividermi potrà da te. Mai più no, mai più no.
As part of Australia's bicentennial, Joan joined the Sydney Symphony Orchestra on their American tour. Here she appeared at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. and in New York.
In 1988, Joan performs with Opera Australia as Anna Glowari in The Merry Widow, which is really late career, new groundbreaking. She's great in the role. She is a great draw, she's a great star, but these big roles are too much of a strain on her voice. Joan's final big full performance was as Anna Bolena in 1988 on the Covent Garden Opera stage. The audiences didn't know it was her last performance because she herself had expected to do another. She signed on for another opera, but then she withdrew and she issued a statement saying that she was not going to sing the role of Rosalind out of respect for the Covent Garden Opera and its audiences.
She wanted to be remembered being at the top of her game, as it were. But she did appear in that run because on New Year's Eve, during the Fledermaus party scene, Covent Garden had a special guest slot where in the middle of the party that Orlovsky is throwing for the guests, 3 opera singers were invited to come onto the stage and do their bits, and they were Luciano Pavarotti, Joan, and Marilyn Horne.
In 1991, she was appointed to the Order of Merit of the British Empire. This extraordinary honour is rarely given to creative artists. Despite the fact that Joan had officially retired from the stage, she surprised audiences in the 1995 film Dad and Dave.
Kate's up at the house, Sandy.
Oh, is she? Right. Yeah.
Having a chat to Cyril Riley.
She also served as a competition judge and she did masterclasses with young singers.
Joan was awarded the Kennedy Center Honours in 2004 for outstanding career achievement. It was one of the countless awards she received in her life, marking a phenomenal career. Having left her remarkable stage career behind her, Joan sawed her final years away from the limelight, living with her husband in Switzerland. In 2010, Joan died peacefully, aged 83.
Joan had wanted a quiet and private family funeral, and this wish was honoured. but also the public and the opera world wanted to honour her too. And so there was a great state memorial service for her in the Sydney Opera House.
There was a fabulous memorial service at Westminster Abbey. The most wonderful moment I remember, I was lucky enough to be there. They played some of her great recordings, and they echoed around the Abbey, and that was absolutely heart-stopping.
A few years after her death, the Sydney Opera House renamed its opera theatre the Joan Sutherland Theatre. Her husband also formed the Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning Opera Foundation. The organisation provides an annual award to young bel cantos across Australia and New Zealand. A fitting tribute to a true opera legend.
It is amazing that a young woman who was told throughout her childhood, adolescence and youth that she was a mezzo actually became one of the greatest sopranos in the 20th century in the world and can hit these incredible notes.
She was a nice woman. Everybody liked her. And she had a terrific sense of humour and no sense of self-importance. You know, she gave joy to people.
She was adored. People adored her singing. She was really, truly one of the greats.